All right, good morning. We are in the book of Luke. We're in chapter 15. Oh, that's not the app I wanted. Seems like I always open up the wrong Bible app for this class. Where is the thing? Okay. Yes, Luke 15. All right. Just making sure I was reading my notes correctly. Sometimes I write those down and it's not very legible. Okay, so we're looking at questions Jesus asked, and we've looked at a number of these already. Of course, we're looking just at unique ones. Is that audio really, really hot? It seems like I am just screaming. Is it just me? Okay. I want everybody to be able to hear, but I don't want to just like overpower you and blow you away. So we're looking again just at the unique ones because some of these we've covered in a parallel account. But today we find ourselves in Luke 15. Of course, three parables that are right here in this section. And let me get to Luke 15. My electronic version here. So the first question in this section, just to get the context, of course, first question will be verse 4, but to get the context, you pick up there in verse 1, then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners, publicans being, of course, tax collectors, but the publicans or tax collectors and sinners draw near to Jesus to hear him. So they want to hear Jesus teach. The Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, this man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. And then verse 3 says, and he spake this parable unto them, saying, and he's going to give three parables back to back to back. He's going to talk about a lost sheep, a lost coin, and a lost boy. And each time the emphasis being on what a great occasion, what a joyous occasion when something that was lost is found, is returned, is restored. And I we've always said, I hope you remember this from various studies of parables that we've done before, parables always have one main point of emphasis. And now any given parable, there are a lot of ancillary lessons, but there's always one main lesson that it's very obvious that it's teaching. By the way, I've been thinking about this in some conversations with Cliff Goodwin. He's taught kind of a short course, I guess, to the students at the Memphis School of Preaching. I don't know, maybe more than once on miracles. There's a class, a summer class at Memphis on parables and miracles. And so he's taught through the miracles, and also from conversations with Cliff, but also a series, hearing some of the series that Wade Webster has done at PTP for the last, I don't know, I think he may have finished it. I don't know if he did it this last year, but it covered several years. But it was a series called Miracles or Parables of Instruction. And all that's just to say, I think from talking to Cliff and considering some of that Wade points out, I think miracles are a lot like parables in the sense that when you look at a miracle, when you study a miracle of Jesus, there's always one main thrust. There's one main reason behind that lesson. Lots of ancillary things as well that we can learn. But it does seem clear to me that every time Jesus did a miracle, there's something there he wants to teach. And you just think about that, and you study those miracles, and sometimes it just kind of jumps out at you, sometimes not so much. But parables, we know, have that one main thrust. And I'm saying all that to say, when you get to the parable of the lost son, I'm just, that's a difficult one for me, because I think, again, it's not to take away from how we emphasize it, because our emphasis always is on the prodigal, right? And he takes up the bulk of the parable as far as the verses go. But I think, in the context, I think the main thrust of the parable of the prodigal son is probably that older brother. Because who is that older brother? It's those Pharisees and scribes that are murmuring. Because that older brother, instead of going, my brother came home? That is wonderful news. I'm so glad he's not living in the far country. I'm so glad we don't have to worry about him and wonder what has become of him. No, he's sitting there, arms folded. I'm not going to that party. He won't even go inside. His father comes out to him. And, who among us hasn't read that parable and thought, man, what a spoiled brat, right? And if I was that daddy, I wouldn't go out to him. I'd say, you can just stay yourself out there. I don't care. You want to be a big baby about it? But the father goes out to him, and he entreats him, and he pleads with him, and he says, this is a happy occasion. And he says, you never did anything like that for me. I've never done anything wrong. You reckon that was true? I doubt that seriously, right? So he's sitting there, I've never done anything. Here I am. You don't ever do anything like that for me. But, your son comes home, calls him your son, not my brother. He's just, blown everything, devoured your living with prostitutes. Did he know that? I don't know any way he possibly could have known that. He didn't know why the party was going on, so it seems he didn't even have any idea that his brother had come home until his father told him. I doubt he's getting letters from his brother from the far country saying, hey, living it up here, and telling him what he's up to. So I don't know. I can't say for sure, but that seems pretty safe to say he's jumping to a conclusion there. Now, might the young man have done that? It's not that far-fetched to believe, and that's probably why the older brother said that. However, just because something is likely to go from that to saying, well, here's what he's done, that's a big difference, isn't it? So again, I don't know. Every time I studied this, I'm like, man, we so often see ourselves in the prodigal son, and maybe you've been there. Some of us have been prodigals that went to the far country and came home. Some of us are that older brother, and we have to say, okay, how am I gonna feel about a prodigal who comes home? We say, man, who would feel bad about a person being restored? And there are various ways that we might behave. It might not be that we just openly say, oh, don't forgive him. Don't forgive her. We might say something like, well, I think he can serve, maybe he could lead prayer, serve at the Lord's table or something, but I think we ought to have a trial period, a testing period, things like that. Or maybe we just sort of look sideways at somebody like, I remember how he used to be. I've heard somebody, I've actually heard members of the church say something to that effect before. So-and-so, he'll sit there and act like he's Mr., righteous and holy, but I remember how he used to be. And I'm like, whoa, what? You remember how he used to be? Like is this guy being, living a hypocritical life? He's living in sin? No. I'm talking about before he became a Christian. You're talking about before he became a Christian? Yeah, man, he used to be a wild fella, and he sits over there and acts like he's Mr. Holier than thou. And I'm like, First of all, I mean, there's so much wrong with this statement. You've made an assumption about his attitude now, that saying, well, he sits over there like he's Mr. Holier now. Maybe he's just trying to worship God. Maybe he's just trying to serve God. You're assigning motives that you just don't know. Second of all, you're going to talk about something somebody did before they became a Christian? That old man is dead. He put him to death. He buried him. And he's a new creature in Christ. Even a child of God that comes home. In fact, that's the same analogy, not using buried with him in baptism, of course, as Paul does in Romans 6, 3, and 4, but the same analogy is used by the prodigal son's father. This, my son, was dead and is alive again. And so again, it's almost like he's saying, hey, all that's forgotten. That son is dead. We've brought him back from the dead in a sense, but this is a new beginning. But again, I don't know. Every time I read this, I think it's hard for me in the context not to say that's the main thrust of the parable of the prodigal son, or the lost boy, as we sometimes say. But be that as it may, let's look at verse 4, which is our next question. I kind of got off on a side tangent there because I don't know. It's just every time I study that parable, it's just. You struggle with that, and it's like, but you look at the context in those first 3 verses, and it's hard to get around. And again, if ever there was a parable that might have 2 main thrusts, this would be the one. But it would be the lone exception that I can think of at least. Yes, sir. I think that's a good point. Adam was saying there's another point here with dealing with authority and who is in charge and who's in charge of doling out forgiveness. And so when the father says, hey, bring a robe, bring sandals, kill the fatted calf, then who are we as the older brother, younger brother, in-between brother, to argue with the father? The older son, never should have been just standing outside pouting. He had no say in that, and who the father accepts back or not. And again, to Adam's point, he's kind of sitting there. Well, I've done all this work. Had the young man abandoned his post? Absolutely. Had he left more work for his older brother? Absolutely. And no doubt that was not just him, by the way. Do you think just the older brother, all that work, the father came and said, well, your brother's taking the inheritance that I gave him. He just taking off, so I'm going to need you to cover all his chores. Do you really think that happened? Or do you think they spread that work around? They spread it around. But everybody had more work to do because of his departure, right? Nobody's denying that. But again, as Adam pointed out, the father, the authority there said, he's back, he's restored. And man, that's a powerful lesson for us. And it's sometimes it's hard for us to do that, isn't it? And make no mistake, he had to come to himself. He had to change his thinking. And he had to get up and leave the far country. Sometimes, if we're not careful, we talk about the prodigal son, and in fact, I've even heard people teach on it, and it comes within a gnat's eyelash, as Brother Cates used to say, of being saved in sin. Oh, God will take you back, and it's people get this idea. Well, hey, that must be nice. I can just do whatever I want. It's not that, and somewhere in between, the idea of you can do whatever you want and God's just going to keep forgiving you, and the other extreme of living in constant fear. Somewhere in between those is the biblical idea that, yeah, you got to leave the far country, and you got to come home. You got to change your mind, change your heart, surrender them to the Father. As the saying goes, God can heal a broken heart, but you got to give him all the pieces, right? Yes, sir. That's right. Yeah, he's part of that household, so yeah, he's already in that covenant relationship with God, and but he had to leave the far country. You know, you can't just stay. I've preached it before. I can't remember if it was the name of the sermon. I got the idea from somebody, but anyway, it was a sermon dealing with the prodigal son, and it was called, or at least dealt a lot in the sermon with used the expression, the land where God is not. And that is the far country. It's the land where God is not. And if you want to come home as a child of God who's gone astray, make no mistake, nobody wants that more than the Father. Again, we've pointed out before in this context, the Father saw him a great way off, which indicates he was looking. And I submit to you, if he was looking that day, I doubt seriously it's just one day he's just like, well, you know, it's been a while. I mean, today's the 6-month anniversary. I wonder if he's, you know, I bet you every single day as he sends the servants home, they're done with their work, families going in maybe to get cleaned up for supper or whatever. I bet you every single day he'd look down that road. Is today the day maybe he's going to come home? Who knows, maybe several times a day as he walked by the road that led toward the far country. He'd just look down the way and see. But he was looking for him, and so he wants you to come home. But make no mistake, he's not going to the far country, because that is the land where God is not. The boy had to get up and go back home. And so it is with us spiritually. We've got to get up, leave sin, leave the far country, and go home to the Father. Yes, sir?
If you look at the way we have pointer fingers at others, you think of the Jew that was praying that he was not thankful that he wasn't like these and that he was praying to be heard.
Right.
I mean, which one's worse?
And that's kind of what the idea you get here from this older brother is just like, boy, I'm thankful I'm not like some people, like this younger brother of mine. I mean, he's gone and devoured our father's inheritance money, and you know, all you could just hear the types of things this guy might say. And again, he's pretty blunt and ugly in what he says to the Father. But yeah, there's a great lesson there. And to your point, Adam, did you mention about, was there extra work? Yes. And is that frustrating? Yes. But there's a bigger picture here. A soul has been, lost, but now he's come home and he's found. Somebody who was lost in sin is restored to a right relationship with God. Can you imagine somebody who's been away for years and comes home, and us sitting here with our arms crossed and saying, that guy used to be the dude that would count, and then he'd go ring the bell, and I took that over when he quit. And I did that for 10 long years. He thinks he can just waltz right back in here. Now, that's a pretty small example, but you get the idea. You could come up with anything, Maybe he was responsible for this area of work, and it left a void, and I sure was busy at that time in my life. I had a lot going on at work, but I stepped up and did that. And for years, sometimes people are sending him cards. Sometimes people are calling, we miss you. He doesn't come back. I'm still doing it, trying to keep my head above water at work and do this too. And then one day he just comes back. Everything's supposed to be all right. Yeah, everything is supposed to be all right. And look, God bless you. God bless you for stepping up and filling that void, because somebody had to. And that's why I was getting at. That's why I wanted to come back to that, because why are you doing it? And if you do it for people, you're going to end up with that kind of disappointment, that kind of anger, frustration, bitterness. I've told y'all before, it's pride. That's what it comes down to. And I've mentioned this before, but it's something that stuck with me. I read this. I think it was a denominational preacher. He talked about he had a friend that had been essentially fired from his preaching position. And so he said, he asked him if they could meet for lunch one day. He could tell the guy was kind of struggling, and he was, facing some bitterness, discouragement. So they met for lunch, and he said, the guy just kept going on and on and on, and finally, at one point, he kind of ended one sort of rant of all the things that he'd been doing for them and had done through the years. And he just says, I don't understand it, man. It is after all I've done for them. And his preacher friend, the guy that was writing, he said, I was close enough to this guy that I could say what I said. He said, there's not everybody you could say this to, but we were close friends. And he said, I told him, brother, did you hear yourself? It's a shame you didn't do all those things for the Lord. And when we do all those things for the Lord, He knows. He has an account. He sees. He is not unrighteous, the Hebrews writer says, to forget our work, labor of love. And when I'm doing those things for Him, well, I could do those for a group of people or an individual for that matter, and have them, as we sometimes say, throw it back in your face. And I can live with that, because ultimately it's for my Father. And whether that's in Bremen, Georgia, Childersburg, Alabama, Chattanooga, Tennessee, where we worked before that, wherever I go, whatever I do, if I'm doing that for the Lord, well, that's the most important thing.
That's the account of let your light shine. Let your light shine, before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven.
That's right. From Matthew chapter 5. Letting your light shine wherever you go. But if we look at everything as, well, I'm doing this and I'm just waiting on somebody to pat me on the back for it or to publicly recognize what I'm doing. It's just, that's the wrong reason. And hey, look, I don't care who you are. There are times when it's going to get overlooked, it's going to get missed, it's going to be thankless. And, I had a friend of mine up in Chattanooga years ago. We were talking about something, and he was saying, I can't remember what exactly it was, but it was something where he had an idea, and he had presented it. It may have been the elders, it may have been some of the young adults. I can't remember for sure now. It's been so long. But he had presented the idea, and it was kind of like, I don't know. And some time went by. I'm talking a few days or a week or two. And then somebody else, I can't remember again if it was one of the elders or one of that group of the young adults, came and said, hey, what if instead we did this? And he said, you know what they did? They stated my idea in different words. And you know what happened? Everybody was like, I like that better. Let's do that. It was like they just changed one or two things, and a couple of days had passed, and it was my idea just like recycled and put a different outfit on it, and now all of a sudden it's like presented as this guy's idea. I said, brother, you're ready to become a preacher now or an elder in the church, because that's what happens sometimes is, you do something, it may be work, it may be an idea, and I had that happen to me with my elders up in Chattanooga. They wanted to start a Bible bowl, and they said, we'd like for you to kind of spearhead that, take that on. All right, I like that idea. So I spent just, I don't know how much time, and I was working part-time for the church, so I'm doing this in my spare time. But I'm spending so much time researching how different people did it and things like that. And so I come up, and I've got this like 4 or 5 page document of rules and setup and how we want to do this. And I go in and I present it to the elders, and I'm just like so excited. And they say, well, brother, what we really had in mind was you going over here to Murfreesboro. there's a congregation over there that they do a Bible Bowl every year, I think, maybe. And we were kind of, one of the elders, I think one of his sons maybe went over there, and he's like, he said he can kind of help talk you through some of the things and just sort of look at how they do it. I said, oh, okay, and I was ready to start this thing. Like I had laid everything out. I said, we can start this thing like, we need time to invite congregations and kind of build some excitement for it, but we can probably start this thing in the next like 3 or 4 months. And they said, whoa, slow down. We had in mind for you to do this, this, and this. Oh, okay. And it kind of just took the wind out of my sails, but I said, okay. So I went over there, went to Murfreesboro. I was working at Blue Cross at the time. I remember very well that trip because coming back over Mont Eagle Mountain, a truck full of chickens, 18-wheeler truck full of chickens, got turned over and wrecked. And I don't know why, I found this out later. I didn't know that night. And we sat on I-24. And we sat and we sat and we sat. I mean, it was just hours. And finally, an 18-wheeler is beside me, and he says, hey, ma'am, you can do what I can't. If I were you, I'd go through that median right there, and I'd turn around, and I'd go to the next exit, and I'd get off and just go home that way. And I said, I don't know how to go home that way. He said, hey, it's real easy, let me tell you. So he told me how to go. I said, man, I appreciate you. And he said, hey, ain't no sense in somebody having to sit here forever because he said, they're saying it's going to be a while. I don't know why, something with the chickens, it may have been, I don't know, but it shut down I-24 forever. And I had to go to work the next day, so I got almost no sleep that night. But I go, talk to this elder's son, I observe, I make my notes, I come in, next meeting with the elders, and I'm like, all right, so here's what I got. They do this differently, and here's what I had in mind, but I don't know, maybe that is a better way to do it. Here's something else they do differently. It's not the same as I had it, but, I kind of like that, and maybe that's a change we need to make. And so I go through 3 or 4 items like that, and the elders say, whoa, brother. We just want to get this thing going. What's wrong with what you had right there? I said, well, you know what? I like your idea. You just want to get this thing going? Yeah, let's get it going. I said, yes, sir. I can do that. And so we went back to what I had to begin with, and that was what they want to do. And that was fine. But, sometimes that happens, and I sort of joke with people. I'll say, you present an idea, and it gets repackaged and presented as somebody else's idea. Well, maybe you're ready for some service as an elder in the church or a preacher or maybe a Bible class teacher, because that happens a lot. But you know what? It doesn't matter. What was our ultimate goal there? A Bible bowl that would help build up the children, help them have some Bible knowledge, and have some fun doing it. Is that what we ended up with? We did. We did several of those, and they were great, and ended up with some pretty big numbers of participation before we stopped doing that, or before I moved to Highland and worked full-time with GBM. So it doesn't matter if it's my idea. It doesn't matter if I'm doing the work, somebody else is doing the work. There's work to be done. Whatever you do, again, this is Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto man. If you do stuff for man, you're just going to be disappointed. There'll be times when nobody appreciates it, nobody's thankful, nobody recognizes it. But if you do stuff for the Lord, well, it doesn't matter if people recognize me or not, because I know God knows. It doesn't matter if people say, boy, thank you, Chad. I know that must have been a lot of hard work, and what a great job. In fact, somebody might be sitting there looking at my handiwork going, yeah, that thing's crooked. I never liked that anyways. Whose idea was that? And they can criticize or whatever, but you can just keep going on, because I can say to myself, well, I didn't do it for you. I don't have to say that to them. I don't have to be ugly about it. I've heard people do that before. Somebody says something and somebody looks and says, well, I didn't do it for you. I don't have to be ugly, but at the same time, I can think to myself, well, I'm sorry you don't like that, but I didn't do it for you. I did it for the congregation, but ultimately I did it for the Lord. I did this, I did that, I did whatever. But Adam makes a great point there, and you know that's the big thing. Why are we doing what we do? Is it for God or is it for some kind of praise or adoration of man? So very good thoughts there. Yes, sir.
In this parable, you see the mind of Christ a little bit in his great wisdom. He starts out these parables, and a man loses 1/100th of what he has. He has 100 sheep, he loses one. The next one, the lady loses 10 of what she possesses, and there's rejoicing both times. And then it says, it makes the point, a man has 2 sons. He loses half of what he has. And then somebody don't want to rejoice in something of unmeasurable value in the son. And I thought it was neat that they always specify exactly.
I never really paid attention to that before, but that is interesting. Jimmy's making the point here, in each of these 3 parables in Luke 15, you see a progression. Now, I've seen it before and pointed out, you know, you have a lost sheep. A sheep, as sheep are prone to do, can just wander away, right? A lost coin, it may have fallen off. We've talked before about the little headdress that the women would wear, and a lot of times coins woven in with that. A lot of times similar to like a dowry, so it probably has a sentimental value, which is why she would search so diligently for this, even though it's not a huge value. But you know, the party she throws to celebrate probably costs way more than what the coin was worth. But she's excited because it has sentimental value. But you know, a coin could be lost, misplaced, lost through neglect, and so sometimes you see people get lost. Like we sometimes use the expression "falling through the cracks," slip out the back door, that kind of thing. It's not God's fault, but it might be neglect of brethren, and they just kind of drift away. A sheep might wander away, but then the son, you know, he chooses, right? But to Jimmy's point, there's, in the first parable, the sheep, the lost sheep, you have 1 out of 100 that goes astray. In the second parable, you have 1 coin out of 10 that is lost. So you go from 1/100th to 1/10, to when you get to the prodigal son, it's half. And the guy only has 2 sons, and one of them leaves. And he said, boy, that's a huge loss. Can you imagine? Maybe that helps us to put this in perspective a little bit more. Can you imagine if something happened and half the congregation just quit? You talk about a lot of work to take up, a lot of slack to take up. But then something happens and they come home. Well, how do we respond? So you got 1/100th, 1/10th, 50%. Yeah, I never really noticed that before, Jimmy. That's a good point. So the question there, verse 4, we've talked a lot about the context, but here's the actual question. What man of you having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, doth not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after that which is lost until he finds it? You know, by the way, the question here is rhetorical. Which man of you? Every man of them would do that, right? There's not a person who wouldn't leave the 99 and go find that lost sheep. And he says that's a picture of God looking for lost humanity. He's speaking, of course, to the Pharisees and scribes. And again, these parables are directed at them because they don't want to, you know, they are the ones that are still at home, safely in the fold, so to speak. The publicans and sinners are the ones, they're sheep that have gone astray, they're the coin that is lost, they're the boy who's gone to the far country. And the Pharisees, the scribes, they don't want them to come home. And so that's this emphasis is the Father longs for all his people, all his servants to be together, to be united, to be faithful. even if they've gone astray, he's going to go out and look for them. He's going to search and sweep, as using that example of the lost coin. And even if they just turn and willingly walk out and go to the land where God is not, he's not going to go to the land where he is not. But if they come home, he will accept them with open arms and fully restore them to that sonship. But the scribes and the Pharisees, they weren't on board with that, so to speak. So Jesus is using this question to point out God's care for each person. And that's the point of these three parables. The value of each individual person. The care that God has for souls, and the joy of the lost being rescued. If somebody ever starts talking to me crazy talk like, I just don't know if God can forgive me. You don't know what I've done. I'd like to spend some time with them in Luke 15, because here's a picture of God and how valuable you are to God, how much he longs for you to come home if you've gone astray, and how willingly and eagerly and wholly he accepts you when you leave the far country and come home and say, Father, I have sinned and I want to come home. And it's a wonderful thing. The next question here is right same context, verse 8. Either what woman, having 10 pieces of silver, if she loses one piece, doth not light a candle and sweep the house and seek diligently till she find it? Again, it's rhetorical. Anybody would do that in that situation. Again, I submit to you, it's that kind of, probably that sentimental headpiece or something like that, where this is not just 1 out of 10 coins. There's some value to it. We've all been there, right? I mean, who hasn't lost something that was important to you? And you might tear your house apart. I'll tell you this, when Brother Garland Elkins died a few years ago, I about tore my office apart one day. I lost a complete day in the office. Absolutely got nothing done that day because I tore my office apart and even went home and looked. And sadly, I was not as blessed as the woman looking for her lost coin. I never found it, and it really gets to me because it was special to me. And I save stuff. I'm a sentimental person. But I tore my office apart looking for a note that he and Sister Elkins had sent us after our wedding, right after our wedding. We went on our honeymoon. We came home. It was in the mail because he had preached our wedding. And we laughed about it for years because Reagan had laryngitis on our wedding day. And so, Brother Elkins kind of made a joke when we were up there, and he went through the vows, and Reagan says, I do. And he says, now I can verify. She did say I do. But, we were like a lot of couples starting out. We were broke as a joke and didn't have much and managed to scrape up, I think, $100 to give him a check. It didn't even cover gas for him and Sister Corinne to come all the way to Cleveland, Tennessee, and then back to Memphis. He didn't want to take it. We just insisted, you have to take this. And so we leave, go on our honeymoon. We come home. We got this card in the mail. It was addressed to Prince Chad and Princess Reagan. And on the inside, it was something, a card. It says something like, hey, thanks for letting us be a part of your special day. And then inside the card was a check torn in two. And that was, of course, the check we had given to him. But I don't know. I've lost it. I can't find that thing. And I say I lost it. I haven't found it yet. There's not a chance in the world that I threw that thing away. I live with somebody who tends to throw stuff away, so it could have mistakenly got thrown out by that, we'll just say a roommate, a beloved roommate. But I don't think so. I think it's probably somewhere, and I just haven't found it. But, again, from verse 8, we're familiar. We've all lost something before that was important, and it may not have had, a piece of paper torn in two and a card. What's the value? Well, the card is ruined for anybody else because it's been written on and signed. So, it's nothing. but I gave up an entire day of my office time. I'm going over to the house. I'm pulling out. I thought it might be, maybe we'd put it in our wedding album with all the pictures and stuff. It wasn't in there. And then I'm going, of course, first place I went was my sentimental box, as I call it. It wasn't in there. And I'm like, how is it not in there? That's where I put everything. And I mean, I'm just tearing the place apart because that was important to me. The lady who's searching so regularly, or so diligently rather, that's a picture of God searching for the soul who's gone astray. Don't ever forget it. You find somebody struggling with accepting forgiveness, struggling with the possibility, the potentiality of forgiveness, take them to Luke 15 and say, you wonder if God forgives? This is a picture of God, our Father. There's nothing He wants more than for you, for me, to come home if we're astray. The value of a soul, the care God has for souls, and how much rejoicing there is when a soul is restored. Anything else on that? I'm going to stop there because our next question is in Luke 16, and there's a lot we'll want to say about this to unpack this question. Anything else? I was looking for something I was going to mention earlier that just came to me. Oh, yeah, I think I've mentioned this before. Verse 7 of Luke 15. Joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repenteth more than over 99 just persons which need no repentance. And then verse 10, likewise I say unto you, there's joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repenteth. It was Tom Holland, I think, that was the first person I heard mention this years ago. But he said, sometimes we talk about, God and the angels, or we'll say that the angels are rejoicing tonight because so-and-so's come forward and asked to be restored, or the angels are rejoicing because so-and-so's obeyed the gospel. And he says, that's true, no doubt. But he said, particularly from verse 10, he said, do you notice what that says? There is joy in the presence of the angels. You know what that implies? That's God. God is rejoicing. Now, are the angels rejoicing too? Sure, because if God's rejoicing, you can guarantee the angels are rejoicing too. But if there's joy in the presence of the angels, that means that's God. And they're shouting for joy and jumping for joy, if you want to use that metaphor, because God is so excited and so joyful. You ever had that happen? Maybe as a dad, you get, it could be some kind of a bonus. Maybe you get a bonus check in the mail, something you just might be something you'd forgotten about, might be something you didn't think was going to happen. And I've had that happen before when my kids were little. You get something, or maybe it's a gift, and they totally don't understand it. They don't get it. And you're just like, you're giddy. And you're just like, oh, man, this is so amazing. And the kids are like, yes, this is so amazing. What is it, Daddy? And they don't understand. They don't quite get it, but they're just excited because you are. Well, the angels are rejoicing here because of the rejoicing that is in their presence. The Father's rejoicing, and they do understand, not to the full extent of the Father, but they're rejoicing because He's rejoicing. And so again, you see that care that God has for souls and the value that He places on souls. All right. Well, that was the last point I want to make on that. Anything else? Questions, comments, snide remarks, anything? All right. Well, I'm out of soap.